This is the fourth grade passage for organisms and environments, specifically the food webs section, and this is what we're doing with the substitute this week. So we're going to go ahead and go through this passage. Please put your name on your passage, and there'll be 3 points for each question throughout the packet. So food webs. All organisms need energy to live. For plants, this energy comes from the sun. Plants use the sun's energy to make their own food through photosynthesis. Plants are called producers because they make their own food. Some organisms eat other organisms to gain energy. These organisms are called consumers. There are different types of consumers. A consumer that only eats plants is called an herbivore. Thus, herbivores eat producers. Deer and rabbits are herbivores. A consumer that only eats meat is called a carnivore. Sharks and lions are carnivores. Carnivores eat both herbivores and other carnivores. Most carnivores hunt their food. A carnivore that hunts is called a predator. The food a predator hunts is called prey. If a shark is the predator, its prey might be a tuna fish. A consumer that eats both plants and meat is called an omnivore. Humans and bears are omnivores. It is normal for bears to eat fish and berries in the same day. There are 2 more types of consumers. A scavenger eats the remains of organisms left by other animals. A vulture is one scavenger. If a wolf kills a deer and leaves some behind, a vulture will eat the scraps. A decomposer eats the waste and dead remains of other organisms. Bacteria and fungi are decomposers. Decomposers play an important role. They break down waste into nutrients that other organisms can use. We have a diagram here of the sun's energy coming around, going into the plants and the algae, which are both producers, which then go into your consumers, which could be herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, scavengers, and decomposers. Organisms rely on each other for food. A food chain is a diagram that shows the path of food energy from the sun to a producer to a single line of consumers. In a food chain, each organism or link feeds the next link in the chain. Arrows in the diagram point in the direction that energy flows. A food chain starts with energy from the sun, but the first link is always a producer. Producers are always first because they are the only links that can make food on their own. The second organism in a food chain is always a consumer. The rest of the links are also consumers. The first consumer in the chain is known as the primary consumer. The second consumer is known as a secondary consumer. We have a diagram here of a food chain. This one's going vertically, that's fine. The sun into the plant producer, into the bunny, which is the primary consumer and an herbivore, into the owl, which is the secondary consumer and a carnivore, and then into the decomposer once the owl dies, the mushrooms, the fungus. Food chains often overlap with other food chains. For example, both a grasshopper and a cow eat grass. The grass begins 2 separate food chains, but the chains overlap since they both begin with the same producer. A diagram of overlapping food chains is a food web. So then we have an example of a web here where it's not a singular chain, right? We can trace a chain, right? We could say that plankton goes into the mussel, which goes into the crab, right? Or we could go a different route. We could say that the plankton goes into the shrimp, which goes into the salmon, which then goes into the heron. We can trace a chain, but it overlaps, right? Because the salmon could get eaten by the seal, or the salmon could get eaten by the heron. So we have multiple pathways. Paragraph 6. The role an organism plays in its habitat is known as its niche. A food web may have many niches that different organisms occupy. Each niche plays a part in the food web. For example, a beaver cuts down trees and builds dams. The dams block streams and back up water. This makes new wetland areas. The new wetlands become a home for other organisms. Changes in the number or type of organisms in an ecosystem can change the food web. If a lot of rabbits move into an ecosystem, the wolves in that food chain will have more food. Sometimes humans bring organisms to new places. Those organisms can harm the food chain that is in place. For example, people brought carp, a type of fish, to new lakes. The carp ate producers that made oxygen for the native fish. With less oxygen, the native fish died. Animals that used to eat the native fish had to learn to eat carp or find other food. Whenever a link in the food chain disappears, the other links are affected. Paragraph 8. One of the biggest changes an ecosystem can face is pollution. Pollution is anything in the environment that can harm living things or natural resources. Garbage is a form of pollution from humans. It is the stuff people throw out. Sometimes people put their garbage where it does not belong. Then it is known as litter. Litter can cause organisms to get sick or die. It also harms habitats. Paragraph 9. When harmful substances float up into the air, it is called air pollution. A lot of air pollution comes from cars and factories. They burn fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. Smoke and exhaust from fossil fuels pollute the air. Some air pollution can happen naturally. Lightning strikes can start forest fires. Fires fill the air with thick smoke. When volcanoes erupt, they send gas and ash into the sky. Still, most pollution comes from humans. All pollution harms food webs. 2 more environmental changes that can harm food webs include floods and droughts. A drought is a long period of time with little rainfall. Droughts can cause producers to die. Without water to drink or producers to eat, consumers die too. Floods and droughts often take place with changes in season. Humans can also cause floods and droughts. Humans build dams that can change the amount of water areas receive. Any change in an environment can change the food web. Okay, so then we're going to go back over to questions. There's a lot of vocab. Most of this we've already covered. If you pay attention to that vocab, it really helps answer a lot of the questions that are going to come up. So you have consumers here, but the definition is actually the sentence before. Organisms eat other organisms to gain energy. We call them consumers. So consumers are organisms that eat other organisms to get energy. If it only eats plants, it's an herbivore. If it only eats meat, it's a carnivore, right? The hunter is called the predator. The food that the predator hunts is the prey. And then if it eats both plants and meat, it's an omnivore. We have covered all of that vocabulary last week. I mentioned scavengers and that they eat the dead things, and we talked about a vulture would be a scavenger, that they're only hunting out the stuff that's left over. And we did definitely cover decomposers, that they break down the dead remains of the decaying organisms, and also waste. Okay, so looking for vocabulary here, we have food chain, which we started this week. It's showing the path of food energy from the sun to a producer to a single line of consumers. And then we also have a food web, which is overlapping food chains. Overlapping and interconnected are going to be the same thing. Okay, in paragraph 6, you have the word niche, and it doesn't look like that's how it's pronounced, but that is how it is pronounced. The role an organism plays is its niche. So basically a niche is like its job. Okay, I'm even going to add that over here, because that's a simpler definition for you. Let's see, the next word is in paragraph 8. We have pollution. It's anything in the environment that can harm living things or natural resources. And then last vocabulary word they have is a drought, which is a long period with little rainfall. So lots and lots of vocabulary in this passage that you need to have a good understanding of, especially since you have Quick Check Friday. All right, questions. Question 1. Remember, for questions, I'm not going to go back and tell you paragraph numbers. You're going to have to pause and go back and look if you don't recall the answer. Number 1, an organism in a food chain is also called a link, B, web, C, line, D, point. So the organism can also be called a something. Number 2, which answer best describes the role of a scavenger? That's going to be one of your vocabulary words. A, it breaks down dead organic material. B, it eats the remains of organisms left by other animals. C, it produces nutrients using the sun's energy. Or D, it provides energy for consumers. Number 3, which answer lists an example of an herbivore? Again, there's your vocabulary. A human, B, a tiger, C, a frog, D, a rabbit. Number 4, the only type of organism that makes its own food is called A, an herbivore, B, a producer, C, a consumer, D, a decomposer. Number 5, where do producers get their energy to make their own food? So we're looking for where producers get energy. A, from other producers, B, from herbivores, C, from the sun, D, from consumers. Where do producers get their energy? Number 6, which answer best describes how herbivores and omnivores are alike? So we have to know what this means, we have to know what this means, and we have to know how they are alike or how they are the same. A, they both eat mainly plants. B, they both hunt other animals for food. C, they are both found in every ecosystem. Or D, they both eat producers. Number 7, which answer best describes a form of air pollution? I would go back to that paragraph about pollution. A, litter in a park. B, smoke in the sky from a factory. C, an oil spill. D, chemicals draining into a river. They specifically asked you about air pollution. Number 8, which consumer most likely eats the greatest variety of organisms? Okay, a variety is when you have like a mix of things. A, an herbivore. B, an omnivore. C, a carnivore. Or D, a scavenger. All right, and we flip the page. This is the matching vocabulary page. Please do not draw lines. I say that every time, and every time somebody draws a bunch of lines, and it's really hard to figure out what you mean. Just write the letter, right? So, and it's matching exactly the definitions that we highlighted in the story. So you can go find niche in the story, and then you can find that exact wording over here on the side. You need to be careful on this one, because you can't just find the first word, right? Eats, 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 eats. There's a lot of them that start with eats. So you can't just find the first word and try to match it that way. You're going to have to match the whole definition. Most of these we covered, though. Most of these you know. Okay, fill in the blank. So you need to go back and find what makes sense from the story. A food web is a diagram of blank food chains. I would go find where it talks about a food web, and that would help you out. So a food web is a diagram of blank food chains. Number 2, when volcanoes erupt, they send blank and blank into the sky. So we're talking about volcanoes, and we're looking for 2 things that they send into the sky whenever they erupt. Number 3, decomposers break down waste into blank that other organisms can use. I would go find that vocabulary word, decomposers, which should be highlighted, and then read around it to see what goes in that blank. Number 4, carnivores eat both blank and other blank. Find the carnivore section. Read about the carnivores. Number 5, in a food chain diagram, blank point in the direction that energy flows. It's going to be in the section about the food chain, which we highlighted. Or I did. I'm not sure if you did. Number 6, the first link in a food chain is always a blank. Again, go back to the food chain section and figure out what the first link in the food chain is always going to be. Number 7, we're looking for the niche again. Okay, don't use my definition. Go back and find the actual definition and write that in the blank there. And then number 8, droughts are long periods of time with little blank. We're looking for the word drought, which again was one of our highlighted words. So the only one of these that we haven't highlighted something near it is the one about the volcanoes. Everything else we highlighted right around where this answer is going to be if we highlighted the vocabulary and paid attention to the vocabulary. Okay, the back's blank. The last section is the final test, which means the answers are not directly stated in the story. There should be something as far as like a clue to help you out, but they may not give the exact answer in the story. Sometimes they do. So we're going to go through the test questions now. Number 1, which answer best describes a carnivore? A carnivore eats other animals and plants. B, a carnivore only eats meat for energy. C, a carnivore eats producers for energy. D, a carnivore only eats remains left by other animals. This tells you to use the food web out of the story to answer both questions 2 and 3. So you're going to have to flip. Here it is. We're talking about right here, the one that's labeled food web. You're going to use this to answer questions 2 and questions 3. All right, so question 2. Which statement is true about the information in the diagram? A, energy flows from the shrimp to the plankton. So you're going to check to see if that's true. Only one of these is true. Energy flows from the salmon to the heron. Energy flows from the crab to the mussels. Or energy flows from the heron to the seal. So go find those animals, right? Put your finger on one, put your finger on the other, and see if your finger goes from the first one to the second one following the arrows. Number 3, which answer names a predator in the diagram? Okay, you have to go back. You have to remember what the definition of a predator is, which you have highlighted. Which one of these is a predator? A, mussels, B, plankton, C, salmon, or D, a worm? Number 4, a fox gains energy by eating a rabbit. The energy originally came from A, sunlight, B, photosynthesis, C, decomposers, D, plants. Okay, originally, where did it come from first? The origin of something, like an origin story, right, for superheroes. Where did the energy originate or originally come from? Sunlight, photosynthesis, decomposers, or plants? Number 5, which of the following is not a consumer? A, a minnow, B, a fungi, C, a vulture, D, an algae. Number 6, which type of consumer eats both plants and animals? A, herbivore, B, omnivore, C, carnivore, D, predator. Eats both. And your last test question, which answer lists a scavenger that was mentioned in the story? If it specifically says it was mentioned in the story, then you need to go back to the part about the scavengers and find if it was A, a vulture, B, a bacteria, C, a wolf, or D, a shark. I think we can do really, really well on this passage, especially since we already covered most of this vocabulary, right? If you highlighted your vocabulary, you have almost all of the answers. You have enough to pass for sure. If you just go by the vocabulary and what you highlighted. Please be good for the sub and have a great day.